Today, we will be discussing a very important issue in the early medieval period of the Indian history, that is, the philosophical systems and the religious cults. When we talk about the philosophical systems, generally we know that in the early medieval period till the advent of the Islam or the other world religions in the Indian context, later Christianity comes in a big way because St. Thomas or people like him, they have come much earlier. But before the advent of these world religions, it was the Indic religion or quote unquote Hinduism which was prevalent, and there within the system there were several way of looking at the life. Now from here the question arises that whether it is perfectly all right to talk about Hinduism as an established religion. It has a long tradition. Starting with the Vedas, there a system arose, and this system continues further. In the later period, in the early medieval period, during the period of our discussion, the Purva Mimamsakas, they are claiming the efficacy of yajna, sacrifice, sometimes even superior to the existence of God. So it is carrying forward the earlier Vedic tradition of sacrificial religion. In the Uttar Mimamsa, there we have the Shuddhadvaita, the pure monism of Shankaracharya. Then we have the qualified monism preached by Ramanuja and his followers. Then we have Bhedabhed of Madhya. So within Uttar Mimamsa, there are very important changes or very important deviations from one another. Ramanuja criticizing Shankara like anything. So they are not a very monolithic in their nature. There are some issues which are tying them together, no doubt in it, but there are very important deviations also. So when we talk about the philosophical systems, we have to keep these things, these very issues in our mind. And a very important tricky question that though we know that India and Hindu, they have the almost same origin. The people who are residents of Sindhu region, with the Persians arriving here, the word arises. Then with the Greek invasion, the same word is being used. Hindu, then Indoi. Later, India becomes the word for a nationality, but Hindu becomes the connotation for a particular community following a particular way of life or a quote unquote religion.
Now, so how did this change take place from a geographical connotation? How did Hinduism become a religious connotation?
Right. This is a very important question or issue. By the 6th, 7th century or 7th, 8th century, very important changes were taking place within the philosophical systems. By late 9th or 10th century, a very important personality, Al-Biruni, comes. And there he finds that though there are a plethora of ways to look at life, already unity also seeping in. And he talks about Srimad Bhagavat as a text which would unite the whole systems. Maybe that as Al-Biruni's work was later circulated much wider in the Arab world and later from Arab world it went into the Western world. Possibly the idea of a separate way of looking at life, a kind of religion, it started gaining ground in the Western world from then onwards. But obviously the kind of Hinduism that we talk about, it may be a much later phenomena, maybe from 19th century onwards when India has already come under the colonial rule.
So can we say that Hinduism got consolidated because of some external factors?
One can look at it in this manner. There are other ways also, because whenever a philosophy or a religion gains ground, there are some internal dynamics and there are some external factors, and it is not a singular event which shapes the whole thing. There are 6 schools, the Shada Darshan, 6 philosophical schools prevalent within quote unquote Hindu philosophy or way of life. There were the Purva Mimamsa, who believed in the efficacy of sacrifice. There was the Uttar Mimamsa, in which there was a spectrum from the pure monism to the dualism of Madhya. Then we have Shankho, which was also a kind of atheistic way of life or philosophy. Then we have Yoga, where the principles, 25 principles of Sankhya, they are maintained, and additional 26th one is added, that is the existence of a god. So it is a kind of theistic religion based upon the bedrock of atheistic principles.
So does it mean that Hinduism also recognizes atheism?
At least Shankha says so, and people who believed in Sankhya, they are also within the whole system. So there may be some people who doesn't believe in God, but also can be a Hindu, because if it is a way of life, then you participate in some aspects and you dissociate yourself from some other aspects. It can be very well possible. Then you have Nyaya and Vaisheshik. These are the 6 schools. And beyond this, you have the Shramanic religion, the Buddhism and Jainism. All these things can be tied on a singular issue other than the Charvakas or the Lokayatas. And in a very important compendium of the philosophical systems, Sarvadarshana Sangraha, all these philosophical schools plus Lokayata Charvaka, they have been described. The Lokayatas and the Charvakas, they didn't believe either in God or in karma. Other than this, there are schools, there are philosophies, quote unquote religion of, say, Shramanic religion. Some of them, like the early part of the Buddhism, they don't believe in God. Maybe not even in Atma, but they believe in karma. They are a kind of renunciatory religion. They want to liberate themselves from the transmigration and try to withdraw from life. So, Indian philosophy or religions can be posited in a spectrum where at the one end, at the very extreme, there are the Shramanic religions who are renunciatory in nature. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the Tantric religions who believe in total involvement in this life, and in between you have a plethora of schools, and the most important of them, they are the Bhakti schools or the theistic philosophies, religion, which grew up from a very important movement in India, Indian way of life, Indian thinking, that is the Bhakti religion, who don't believe in withdrawing oneself from the life as the Shramanics are, or they don't believe either in the very extreme type of activities that the Tantrikas do. So they are the real middle path that they followed. At the very beginning of the entry point of the millennium, we find that India was within a very thriving political system. The last millennium ended with the pan-Indian Mauryan Empire, breakdown of it, coming of the some foreign dynasties, trying to establish them, some of them getting Indianized. For instance, Heliodorus establishing Gadura Stambha, being a devotee of Vishnu. Some of them becoming Buddhists, like the Kushanas. That was at one point. Another situation was, India was the very hub of thriving commercial activities, a very important segment in the Indo-Romanic trade, Indo-Roman trade. Now, by the 3rd century, 4th century AD, the situation was changing a bit. Indo-Roman trade was faltering. And in this condition, where the major political powers are also withdrawing themselves or getting fragmented, we find that a very fierce struggle was taking place between the Shamanic religion and the Puranic religion, who are coming back. The epics are being written, and in epics we find the conglomeration of many different types of elements. For instance, when Megasthenes comes, or in the writings of Aryan, they say that in India the cult of Heracles is there, and possibly they are referring to a cult of Krishna. So Gopala Krishna cult was there, Vasudeva cult was there, Narayana cult was there. In Mahabharata we find that these 3 streams, they are conglomerating, they are coming together and forming a kind of Vaishnavite religion, or establishing the basis of a Vaishnavite religion. Same thing for Shaivite cult also. In this situation, bhakti was coming up, fiercely critical about the Shamanic religion, and the center, the geographical locale was South India. In the 7th to 9th century, we find that the bhakti religions were coming up very fiercely, and they were very much critical about this Shamanic religion. The Shamanic religion, they were telling that a person, an individual, is responsible for his or her own act, karma, and he or she has to strive for one's own to get away from this cycle of karma or transmigration. So it is the individual who is responsible. But here the bhakti, they are preaching that no, you have to surrender yourself completely on the feet of the God, and God will look after you. So here they are finding a way out to get out from this prison of karma, and it will be the divine intervention, Karuna, Arul, who will extricate you from this mundane world. And it was being done through stone melting songs of the Nayanars, Shaivite saint poets, Alvars, the Vaishnavite saint poets. They were preaching this self-sacrifice to God. Appar, his actual name is Tirunavukarasar, a Shaivite saint poet. He is telling that Adiyarkum Adiyen, I will be the servant of God. In this manner, they were shifting, and this is a very major shift which was happening in the quote-unquote Hindu philosophy. And because of the strength of this theistic religions, we find that all the philosophical streams that we have mentioned earlier, they were trying to adjust themselves to this growing popularity of theism. In fact, Uttar Mimamsa, particularly the Vishishtadvaita and Bhedaved, they are trying to address this very issue. In Vishishtadvaita, the position of prapatti, that is surrendering oneself to God, there a very important shift is happening within the Sri Vaishnavas, that they are called Vadakalai and Tengalai, that is the northern path and the southern path. It is the position of Tengalai, that it will be the God's will, His Karuna. He will take you out from this mundane world. It is Marjaranai. Have you seen a cat carrying her kitten? It is holding the neck of the kitten and carrying it to the other place that she wants to carry. You just do whatever you like, and it will be the God's decision. In the northern path, it is Markatane, a kid, monkey. It holds firmly to its mother, and whenever it loses the grip, mother don't look its way. So it is, you have to strive for it. You have to hold to the God firmly, or otherwise if you lose the grip, God will not look after you. And it is not simply a philosophical division that they are talking about. Vadakalai, they are preferring the northern scriptures, whereas Tenkalai, they are trying to extol the Tamil scriptures. In this manner, we find that they were trying to address the issue of karma, which was uniting even the Shramanas, who were very much apart from this theistic religions, but they were also converging or verging towards theism. There, the issue of Bodhisattva comes. Buddha is telling that you will get nirvana. But what after nirvana? So in this manner, we find that all the philosophical schools, despite their serious differences, sometimes they are fighting among each other, but sometimes they are converging on a particular issue. And here the issue is the how to address this karma. One answer is just to withdraw from the world. Another is to very much engage with this world, and God will look after you. In this manner, the philosophical schools and the religious cults also, they were growing up in the early medieval period.
So what was the social background in which all these changes were taking place?
Some very important structural changes were taking place in particularly the South Indian society. As you are familiar that in the just earlier part, maybe the dating is a problem, but possibly in the first part, first or second century of the Christian era, there, according to the Sangam texts, there were several bigger kings, Vampavendan, and there were some smaller kings, Kurunilamannar, and they were fighting among each other, fiercely competitive. Now, in this situation, suddenly we find coming of a strange people. It has not much reference. It is just said that they were the Kalabhras, some Kalabha in Prakrit, and one Achyuta Vikanta has been named, who was a great devotee of Buddhism, or he was patronizing the Buddhists. And all the major kingdoms, the Cholas, Pandyans and the Cheras, they have disappeared, vanished in thin air. And the whole of the peninsula, or the southern part, that is the present Tamil country, and maybe some parts of the Kerala, it was dominated by these Kalabhras. And in this period, possibly, we have some of the greatest epics like Silapadigaram, Manimegalai. Now, in this background, we find suddenly the Vaishnavite Alvars and the Shaivite Nayanars, they are coming up with their stone melting songs. Now, how to look at this bhakti movement? Because it is a very important movement which shaped the future of some important religious cults. There we find historians debating among themselves about the real import of, the real significance of this movement. Some say that it was a kind of social protest, generally the idea that we are familiar with. But now, with the analysis of the participants from the hagiographies, we find that many of these proponents, both in the Shaivite sect or in the Vaishnavite sect, belonged to the Brahmin caste. The others, a large portion, they were the largest agricultural castes, the Vellalas. Now, in the hagiography, framed much later in the 12th century, Periya Puranam, Chekkalar, he is telling the story of 63 Shaivite saints. Out of these 63, only 7 they have composed poems, songs. Among the 12 Vaishnavite Alvars, barring the first 3, the rest 9, out of them we find that there were several Brahmins, there were some kings, and one or two from the downtrodden caste. So it is difficult to portray them just as a protest movement, but obviously it had a very strong messianic appeal. Obviously it had, because what they were trying to do was to say that if you are sacrificing yourself at the altar of God, then those people who have sacrificed themselves within that community, there is no caste barrier. Tondar Adipodi, dust of the feet of a Tondan. Tondan is the follower of God, servant of the servant. All these things means that if you follow a particular path, if you are sacrificing yourself to a particular God, then within that very limited community, there is no caste barrier. So this might have attracted the common people to flock towards these theistic sects. What was happening on the other front, as you are asking the social question, as I told that there was a significant change, very important for South India, that the thriving Indo-Roman trade has come to an end. The merchant class, who were one of the greatest supporters of these heterodox sects, they were not so much powerful now. So the heterodox sects, they are trying to search for newer pastures, which might have irked this theistic sects or followers of the theistic sects, which lead to a very sharp struggle between themselves. This revolves around a very important philosophical question, the position of karma. According to the Shramanic religion, it is the individual who is responsible for his own act, and it is he who will extricate oneself. There is no outside intervention. You follow a particular path, maybe eightfold path, you will extricate yourself. But in the theistic religion, it is not the individual, but it is the compassion of the God who will take out from this situation. So, theistic religion, they were addressing a very important issue, how to circumvent the issue of karma that we have seen as the uniting thread between all these separate and very disparate kind of sects. So at the end, we find that though there were differences within the different philosophical schools, but then too there were some important issues which united these schools, though looking at it differed. The issues remained same, but the perspectives varied, which resulted in different types of answers. And these answers, if we follow them through the texts, then it may answer some of the existential problems that we have in our present day world. And that is the contemporary significance of the issues that we have discussed, which were happening in the hoary past in the first millennium AD.